Ma'am, you need to calm down or I will terminate this call. The 911 dispatcher's voice was a flat, impatient monotone. Dorothy clutched the phone, her daughter missing for 24 hours. But when she gave the dispatcher her daughter's name, the response was a sigh, then a dial tone. He hung up. What the dispatcher didn't know, what his screen didn't show, was that the missing woman was an active FBI agent, and her mother had just been dismissed as a hysterical black woman. Dorothy was a retired nurse, not prone to panic. But her daughter, Agent Maya Pierce, had missed a crucial check-in from a deep-cover operation. That single hung-up call triggered a frantic search by the FBI, who traced the last signal to a known surveillance blind spot. But as federal agents scrambled, a more disturbing question emerged. Was this a one-time terrible mistake, or evidence of a deadly pattern hiding in plain sight within the city's emergency response system? Special Agent Maya Pierce was 38 hours into a wiretap operation. Her target was a financial network laundering money for a domestic extremist group. The protocol was simple, a coded text to her handler every 6 hours. At hour 42, the text never came. Across the city, her mother Dorothy felt the silence. It was a violation of a promise made years ago, after Maya's father, a beat cop, was killed responding to a hoax call. "You always check in," he told them both. Dorothy waited 2 more hours, then dialed 911. The Metropolitan Emergency Communications Center handled over 3,000 calls a day. Dispatcher Brian Jenkins, a 12-year veteran, took Dorothy's call. Audio logs would later capture the entire 90-second exchange. Dorothy's voice was measured at first, giving Maya's name, description, and the make of her government vehicle. Jenkins can be heard typing slowly, then sighing. "Ma'am, adults are allowed to go missing. Has it been 72 hours?" When Dorothy insisted her daughter was an FBI agent and in danger, Jenkins's tone shifted. "Everyone on the phone says it's an emergency. You need to calm down or I will terminate this call." The line went dead. Dorothy stared at the phone, then did the only thing left. She called the direct line to the FBI field office, a number Maya had given her for a true catastrophe. The reaction was instant and volcanic. An agent's missed check-in was a Priority 1 alert. The location of Maya's last signal, a downtown parking garage, became a hot zone. But as tactical teams flooded in, senior agent in charge Frank Cole made another call. He wanted the 911 recording. When he heard Jenkins hang up, his blood went cold. "Get me that dispatcher's file, and pull every call he's handled in the last 6 months." What they found in Brian Jenkins's personnel file was a record of mediocrity shielded by a powerful union. 3 written warnings for rude conduct, a suspension for tardiness, but no formal retraining. His performance reviews called him adequate under optimal conditions. But the real story was in the numbers. An internal audit conducted quietly the next day revealed a staggering disparity. Jenkins had a call termination rate, hanging up before protocol was complete, of 4.2%. The center's average was 0.6. But when analysts cross-referenced the demographics of the callers he disconnected, the pattern became unmistakable. Over 80% were from non-white neighborhoods. It wasn't just hang-ups. Average hold times for calls from the city's predominantly black South Side were 22 seconds longer. Priority assessments for disorder calls from those zip codes were consistently downgraded. Agent Cole presented the data to the center's director, Helen Morrow. Her response was defensive, bureaucratic. "Correlation isn't causation, Agent. Mr. Jenkins is a union employee with due process rights. Our systems are colorblind." But the system wasn't blind. It was built on a foundation of old, unspoken codes. The dispatch software used mapping and statistical crime data that inherently flagged certain neighborhoods as higher risk, which translated to slower, more skeptical responses. Dispatchers like Jenkins weren't just bad apples. They were operating within a framework that implicitly devalued certain calls. Meanwhile, the search for Maya was hitting walls. Her car was found empty. Her service weapon was gone. The wiretap had gone dead. The only lead was a cryptic, encrypted message sent from her phone 40 minutes after her missed check-in. It wasn't to the FBI. It was to her mother's email. The text couldn't crack it. Dorothy, sitting in a sterile FBI conference room, made a decision. If the city wouldn't listen, she would make them hear. She called a local reporter, Sonia Martinez, who had covered police accountability for a decade. She played her the 911 recording. The story exploded online by midnight. The headline was brutal. 911 dispatcher hangs up on Black mother's plea. Missing woman is FBI agent. The public outrage was immediate, but inside the communications center, the reaction was a lockdown. Union reps circled around Jenkins. Director Morrow drafted a statement calling it an unfortunate incident and pledging a review. Then at 3 a.m., Agent Cole got a call from his tech team. They'd finally cracked Maya's message. It wasn't text. It was a short, distorted audio file recorded in a hurry. A man's voice, calm and threatening. "The transfer is at the old Riverfront Depot. You have no idea how deep this goes. The money is just the surface." A gunshot echoed in the background. Then Maya's voice, a whisper. "Mom, the call logs. It's in the call logs." Cole replayed it, his mind racing. What call logs? The 911 logs. He looked at the sprawling data from the dispatch center, the thousands of neglected calls, the patterns of dismissal. Was it possible Maya hadn't just been investigating a financial network? What if she had stumbled onto something the city's emergency system was designed to hide? The search for a missing agent was now a hunt for a secret buried in plain sight, one that began the moment a dispatcher decided a mother's fear wasn't worth his time. The call logs. Agent Cole played Maya's distorted message again. Her whisper was a key. He assembled a dedicated team, separate from the main search, with one directive: treat the Metropolitan Emergency Communications Center as a crime scene. Its data was now evidence. They started with Brian Jenkins, not just his record but his finances, his associations. Within hours, a pattern emerged beyond negligence. Jenkins had purchased a new luxury truck 6 months prior, cash. His spending patterns showed regular, sizable cash deposits. He claimed it was gambling winnings. But the timeline of his spending spikes correlated with something else: days when his call termination rate spiked. Meanwhile, reporter Sonia Martinez published her second piece. She didn't just focus on Dorothy. She had filed public records requests for the center's complaint logs. The documents revealed a hidden history. Over 300 formal complaints in 5 years, specifically about calls being dismissed or downgraded. 70% came from the same cluster of zip codes. The city had settled 12 lawsuits quietly, with non-disclosure agreements sealing the details. One case involved a man who died of a heart attack after a dispatcher told him to stop yelling and call back when you can speak calmly. The settlement was for $200,000. The dispatcher received a written warning. Public pressure became a tsunami. Protesters gathered outside the communications center. City council demanded hearings, but inside the fortified building, the bureaucracy closed ranks. Director Helen Morrow held a staff meeting. The audio, leaked by a conscience-stricken employee, captured her directive. "We are a family. We do not air our laundry to outsiders. You talk to the FBI, you talk to reporters, you are terminated, and the union will not protect you." This threat had teeth. The dispatchers' union, led by a gruff former police sergeant named Vince Crow, was legendary for its protectionist stance. It had successfully defended employees fired for sleeping on duty, for racist remarks overheard on calls. Its contract made disciplinary action nearly impossible without years of documented identical infractions. Crow's message to his members was simple: they want a villain. Don't give them one. Stick to the protocol. Say nothing. The FBI hit a wall. Every dispatcher they interviewed invoked their union rep and recited the same script. "I follow protocol. The system guides my response." The system. Cole's tech analyst, a young woman named Anya, focused on it. The dispatch software was called Guardian Response. It used algorithms to prioritize calls, suggesting resource allocation and threat levels. Anya ran a simulation, inputting identical emergency scenarios but changing only the neighborhood of origin. The software consistently suggested lower priority and slower response times for addresses in the South Side and the East Crescent, the city's poorest and most diverse districts. The bias wasn't in the people. It was coded into the machine, a digital reflection of decades of biased policing data. But Maya's clue hinted at something more deliberate. The call logs. Anya had a hypothesis. What if specific calls weren't just downgraded? What if they were disappeared? She began cross-referencing Jenkins's shift logs with police dispatch records. She found discrepancies. On at least 17 occasions over the past year, a call logged by Jenkins as non-urgent, resolved by caller, had no corresponding police dispatch record. But on those same days and times, police units had been dispatched to other locations, minor traffic details, business checks in affluent neighborhoods. It was as if the system had been used to deliberately misallocate resources. Dorothy, armed with this information from Sonia Martinez, did something radical. She went to the communities the data highlighted. She stood in church basements and community centers, playing the recording of her own call. "Has this happened to you?" she asked. The stories poured out. A mother calling because her son was having a seizure, told to stop screaming. A store owner reporting a robbery in progress, put on hold until the thieves were gone. Each story was a data point the official logs had erased through categorization. Unfounded, caller error, no unit available. One story stopped Dorothy cold. An elderly man named Mr. Henderson described calling 911 6 months ago from the old Riverfront Depot. He'd seen armed men moving crates late at night. The dispatcher, a man with a tired voice, had told him it was probably security guards and to stop wasting the emergency line. The Riverfront Depot, the exact location from Maya's encrypted message. Cole's team descended on the depot. It was a decaying warehouse slated for demolition. Forensics found evidence of recent occupancy, energy drink cans, tire marks, and in a dusty corner, a single 9mm shell casing. It was a match for Maya's service weapon. The pieces were locking into a terrifying picture. The depot was a transfer point for the laundering network. Someone needed a clean perimeter for their operations. What better way than to ensure that any emergency calls from that location were dismissed as nuisance calls? Brian Jenkins's termination spike made a new, sinister kind of sense. He wasn't just negligent, he was on a payroll. He was a lookout, using his headset to provide security. The FBI moved to arrest Jenkins, but he was gone. His apartment was cleared out. His financial records showed a final, large cash withdrawal. The union's Vince Crow expressed shock and concern for his missing member. The center's director, Helen Morrow, now faced a federal conspiracy investigation. Her lawyer issued a statement claiming she was a dedicated public servant misled by a rogue employee. It felt tidy, a bad apple plucked. The city prepared to breathe a sigh of relief, but Anya, the analyst, kept digging. She found the flaw in that neat story. The pattern of misallocated resources, the downgraded calls, it wasn't isolated to Jenkins's shifts. It persisted at a lower frequency across multiple dispatchers on all shifts. The software bias explained some of it, but not the active deletion of call records. That required supervisor-level access. She traced the digital authorization for the 17 deleted calls. The login credentials belonged to a system administrator account named GSI Admin. The account had been created 5 years ago. Its access logs showed it was used almost exclusively during overnight shifts, and it was linked to a single, hardwired terminal in the center's secure server room. Someone inside the heart of the operation was systematically editing history. Cole confronted Director Morrow with this. She paled, not with guilt, but with fear. That terminal, that's the legacy backup system. Only 3 people have that key: me, my deputy, and the union's technical liaison. The position was a concession in the union contract, allowing them to monitor system changes that affected their members. The liaison was Vince Crowe, the union president. The pivot was staggering. It wasn't one corrupt dispatcher. The very union tasked with protecting the dispatchers was allegedly manipulating the system. Crowe had the keys, the knowledge, and the motive. His members' jobs were safe because he helped ensure the city's dirty secret, the systemic neglect of certain communities, stayed buried. And in this case, that service had been sold to a criminal network. A federal judge granted a wiretap on Crowe's phones. What they heard in the first 24 hours was not the ranting of a corrupt official, but the calm, strategic communications of a man running a business. He spoke to a shadowy figure referred to only as the contractor, discussing service fees and zone maintenance. He reassured dispatchers who expressed unease about specific calls, telling them, "The protocol is just a guideline. Your judgment is what matters." Then the wiretap delivered a hammer blow, a call from a blocked number. Crowe's voice tense. "The asset is still missing. That's a loose end. The mother is digging. She needs to be discouraged." The voice on the other end was garbled, but the response was clear. "Understood. We'll send a message." 2 hours after that call, Dorothy returned to her small, neat house to find her front window shattered. A brick lay on her living room floor. Tied to it was not a note, but a single item, an FBI badge holder. It was empty, but the clip was broken in a way Dorothy recognized. It was the way Maya always snapped it onto her belt. The message was terrifyingly clear. They had her daughter, and if Dorothy didn't stop, they would send back more than just the empty leather. The broken badge holder wasn't just a threat. It was a forensics goldmine. The FBI lab lifted a partial fingerprint from the leather, not Maya, but one that matched a known associate of the extremists she was tracking. The brick throwing was a mistake. It connected the 911 conspiracy directly to the terrorist financing case. Agent Cole made a decisive move. He placed Dorothy in protective custody, but not in hiding. He used her as a strategic asset. With her permission, he leaked the details of the attack to reporter Sonia Martinez. The headline was incendiary. "Witness intimidated. Mother of missing FBI agent targeted after exposing 911 failures." The public outrage now had a face and a direct line to the criminal threat. The wiretap on Vince Crowe, the union president, began yielding dividends. He was panicking. They heard him arrange a meeting with the contractor at a private golf club on the city's outskirts. Surveillance teams watched as Crowe sat down with a man named Arthur Vance. Vance wasn't a thug. He was a respected city councilman, the chair of the Public Safety Budget Committee. He oversaw the funding for the Emergency Communications Center. The contractor was the politician. This changed everything. The corruption wasn't confined to the union or a few dispatchers. It had a political protector. Vance's district included the rapidly gentrifying riverfront area where the old depot stood. His largest campaign donors were real estate developers buying up the distressed properties. Anya, the analyst, cross-referenced again. She mapped the locations of the most severely downgraded 911 calls over the past 5 years. The map lit up in the very neighborhoods now being touted in Vance's Riverfront Renaissance project brochures. The pattern was a brutal logic: depress emergency response, let crime fester, drive out long-time residents with fear, then buy the properties cheap. The 911 system wasn't just negligent, it was being weaponized for urban renewal. But where was Maya? The wiretap caught Crowe pressuring a low-level union steward, a dispatcher named Gina. "You need to clean the log for that night, the depot call. The system shows it was deleted, but there's a backup. Find it and purge it." Gina's voice was trembling. "I don't have that access, Vince. Only you and the director have the master keys." Cole's team moved on Gina. Confronted in her home, she broke. She confessed that Crowe had a system. Dispatchers who cooperated by downgrading calls in certain zones, by not questioning orders, got preferential shifts, protection from discipline, and small, untraceable cash bonuses. She gave them the key. The backup Crowe mentioned was an analog tape system, a relic kept for legal compliance, stored in a locked basement room at the center. It recorded every call unedited. Crow had been trying to delete digital records, but the tapes were the immutable truth. Getting a warrant was easy. Executing it was a battlefield. The Union, sensing the net closing, called a sudden safety stand-down. Dozens of dispatchers walked off the floor, plunging the city into a temporary emergency response crisis. It was a diversion. While city leaders scrambled, Cole's team entered the communications center with a tactical squad. They found the tape room. It was pristine, the reels spinning slowly. But the tape for the night of Maya's disappearance and for the night Mr. Henderson called about the depot was gone. The logbook showed they had been removed for routine maintenance by order of Vince Crow. It was a devastating setback, but as they searched Crow's office, they found something else. A ledger, not digital but handwritten, old school. It listed dates, call reference numbers, and dollar amounts. Next to each entry was a two-letter code. One column was marked V's, Arthur Vance's initials. The ledger showed monthly payments flowing from V's to a numbered offshore account, and then dispersals to several dispatchers, including Brian Jenkins. The amounts matched Jenkins's unexplained cash deposits. The corruption was meticulously documented. The FBI now had evidence of a racketeering conspiracy. They could take down Crow and Vance, but they still didn't have Maya. And then, the wait, it gets worse moment arrived. Anya, cross-referencing the ledger with police response data, made a horrifying discovery. The codes next to the entries weren't just for location. They were outcome codes. NH for no help, LD for late dispatch, and FA for false alarm. She ran the FA codes. These were calls that had been logged as pranks or false reports. One, from 8 months ago, was a call about a domestic disturbance from an apartment in the East Crescent. The dispatcher, Jenkins, had logged it as a likely verbal altercation, no units required. Police never went. The next morning, a woman named Lena Green was found dead in that apartment. Her husband, who had a history of violence, was arrested. He claimed he'd called 911 himself during the fight, begging for help, and was told to calm down. The conspiracy hadn't just covered up criminal activity, it had facilitated murders. The death toll of the scheme was no longer abstract. It had names. This revelation fractured the Union's wall of silence. Dispatchers who had accepted small bribes to downgrade calls had no idea they were signing death warrants. One by one, they began reaching out to the FBI, offering testimony in exchange for protection. From this chorus of fear, a single, clear lead emerged. A dispatcher recalled that on the night Maya vanished, Brian Jenkins had been unusually agitated. He made a call from his personal phone, whispering about the package being delivered to the Foundation. The dispatcher remembered the phrase because it was odd. The Foundation. Cole's team scoured Vance's properties. He was on the board of several charities. One was the Riverfront Community Foundation, a nonprofit set up to fund neighborhood beautification. Its listed address was a P.O. box, but its annual gala was held at a secluded, members-only hunting lodge outside the city, owned by one of Vance's developer friends. Satellite imagery showed the lodge had a secure, walled compound. Thermal scans indicated multiple human heat signatures in the main building and a detached garage. It was the kind of place you could hide someone. The pieces were aligning for a rescue raid, but Arthur Vance was a city councilman with powerful friends. A failed raid would be a political disaster and could get Maya killed. They needed undeniable proof she was there. Then Dorothy, watching the news in her safe house, saw a segment on the Riverfront Community Foundation's upcoming charity auction. The video showed the lodge's interior. On the mantelpiece, barely in frame, was a small, carved wooden elephant. Maya had one exactly like it, a gift from her father. It was on her desk at home. It was missing when the FBI searched her apartment. Dorothy called Cole, her voice steady with certainty. "She's there. They took her elephant. She's there." It was the thread they needed. Cole presented the evidence: the ledger, the tape theft, the thermal scans, the eyewitness account of Jenkins's call, and now the personal artifact, to a federal judge. At 3 a.m., he was granted a no-knock warrant for the lodge and arrest warrants for Arthur Vance and Vince Crowe. As the sun began to bleed light over the horizon, 24 FBI agents in full tactical gear assembled in a hangar. The plan was simultaneous strikes, one team to hit the lodge and rescue Maya, another to arrest Vance at his home, and a third to take Crowe at the Union Hall. Cole looked at his team, then at Dorothy, who had insisted on being nearby. "We bring her home," he said, "and we tear their whole world down on the way." The engines of the black SUVs roared to life, carrying them toward a confrontation that would expose a city's rotten heart or bury the truth forever. The raid on the hunting lodge was a study in controlled violence. The FBI's tactical team breached the gate at dawn. Inside, they found Arthur Vance and two of his developer associates in a panic shredding documents. But it was the detached garage, listed as storage, that held the prize. Its door was reinforced steel, locked from the outside. When they blew the lock, they found Maya Pierce. She was handcuffed to a pipe, dehydrated with a bruised face, but her eyes were fiercely alert. On the floor beside her was a stack of ledgers, identical to the one found in Crowe's office. She had been forced to decode them for her captors. She looked at the lead agent and said, "The Foundation isn't a charity, it's the ledger. The whole city in there." Simultaneously, other teams arrested Vince Crowe at the Union Hall and Councilman Vance at the lodge. The arrests made national news. The image of Vance, in a monogrammed bathrobe being led away in cuffs, shattered the political facade. Maya was rushed to the hospital. Her debrief was a torrent of crucial information. She confirmed the extremists were using Vance's development projects to launder money. The Riverfront Depot was one node, but her kidnapping had yielded an unexpected advantage. She had memorized key parts of the ledgers. They didn't just track bribes. They recorded every service, every downgraded call, every delayed response, and linked it to a specific property acquisition or zoning change. The evidence was overwhelming. Facing life in prison, Brian Jenkins, the dispatcher who had hung up on Dorothy, was found hiding in a motel and flipped immediately. He confessed to being on Crowe's payroll, confirming the cash-for-call scheme. But he also gave up the final, devastating piece, the location of the missing analog tapes. Crowe had stored them in a safety deposit box under a fake name, a trophy of his control. The tapes were recovered. The one from the night of the depot call contained Mr. Henderson's frightened, precise report of armed men. Brian Jenkins's dismissive response was chillingly clear. The tape from the night Maya disappeared contained something else, a call from a payphone near the depot, a man's voice warning of suspicious federal activity. That call had been routed to Jenkins, who logged it as a drunk nuisance and deleted the digital record. He had sold out an FBI agent for $500. The trials were swift and public. Vince Crowe, Arthur Vance, and 3 developers were convicted on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Brian Jenkins and 4 other dispatchers pleaded guilty to bribery and fraud. The union was placed under federal supervision, its contract voided. The city settled the lawsuits from the families of Lena Green and other victims for a total of $47 million. But money wasn't the real victory. The systemic overhaul began. The Guardian response software was scrapped. A new system with bias audits built into its code was installed. Every 911 call would now be recorded and retained for 10 years, with supervisors randomly reviewing responses. Dispatcher training was completely rewritten, focusing on de-escalation and implicit bias. A community oversight board with real power to subpoena records and fire personnel was established. Dorothy was offered a permanent seat. She accepted. Maya recovered physically and returned to duty, but the experience changed her trajectory. She transferred to the FBI's Civil Rights Division, focusing on systemic corruption within public institutions. The final surprise, the one that sealed the legacy of the scandal, came from the analog tapes. While cataloging them, a clerk found a tape from 5 years earlier. It contained a call from a young man reporting his friend was suicidal, had a gun, and was locked in a bathroom. The dispatcher, following an old, callous protocol, had told him to call back when something actually happens. The friend died. The dispatcher was Helen Morrow, then a senior supervisor, now the former director. She had been promoted shortly after. The tape revealed the rot started at the top, long before Crowe and Vance. Morrow was charged with negligent homicide. On a bright autumn day, a new plaque was unveiled outside the renovated Emergency Communications Center. It listed the core principles: compassion, equity, integrity. Below it, a smaller, simpler monument bore the names of Lena Green and others whose calls for help had been ignored. Dorothy stood before it, Maya by her side. The system that had failed her so catastrophically had been forced to change. But as she looked at the names etched in stone, she knew the real monument was the silence that had been broken. It was the sound of a mother's frantic voice, once dismissed as noise, that had echoed through the halls of power and demanded, finally, to be heard. A single call had brought a corrupt city to its knees. The story of Dorothy and Maya is a work of fiction, but the system it exposes is terrifyingly real. The Houston dispatcher convicted of hanging up on thousands. The Buffalo operator who dismissed a call during an active massacre. The algorithm that labels certain neighborhoods as lower priority before a human even hears a voice. These aren't isolated errors. They are symptoms of a systemic illness, one where bias can be baked into software and neglect can be monetized. The 911 system, created in an era of social unrest, has never fully shed its origins. It remains a fragile, human-powered gateway where life and death decisions are made in seconds, often by overworked individuals relying on flawed data. The question this story leaves us with isn't about a single corrupt dispatcher or a greedy politician. It's about the silent failures we never hear. For every call that goes viral, how many are quietly downgraded, dismissed, or deleted? How many emergencies are logged as nuisances because of the zip code they come from or the accent of the caller? The real-world reforms are slow, but they are happening. Cities are auditing their dispatch algorithms for racial bias. States are passing laws against weaponizing 911 with racially motivated calls. Communities are demanding oversight. The silence is being challenged. But technology alone won't fix it, because at the heart of the system, there's still a person with a headset making a split-second judgment. The ultimate safeguard isn't better software. It's the relentless, uncomfortable questioning of why some cries for help are heard as emergencies and others are heard as noise. Dorothy's fictional call was answered because her daughter was an FBI agent. But what about the calls where there's no badge to give the story weight? What about the calls that don't have a dramatic second act? The integrity of the system isn't measured by how it handles the easy calls, but by what it does with the ones it's tempted to ignore. If you found this exploration of justice and systemic failure compelling, make sure to subscribe. We delve into the hidden architectures of power every day, stories where a single moment can change everything. Until next time.